Chapter 3. Breath eluded me. Trying to regain my color and composure, I calmly approached Goodwife Sampson and inquired if she had searched my room and come upon the box that the girl had delivered. She indignantly replied that she had not. Upon returning to my room, I realized that she was telling the truth, for the room showed no sign of being searched. Whoever found the relic knew exactly what he was looking for and where to find it. I immediately suspected the troll, for who else could have been so clairvoyant? But old tales and life experience had already taught me that there were other dark forces in the universe with similar powers who would be interested in obtaining so holy an object. Besides, whatever else you could say about him, Nehtaehkin was particular about his business agreements. No, someone or something else was responsible for this robbery. John asked me to confide in him about what was distressing me. Here I was truly at a loss. I wanted to confide in him. I needed help. But I was under orders to trust no one. I decided to compromise, and I explained that Robert had given me something of sentimental value, which had obviously been stolen from my room. We searched the room together for the box, but I knew it was in vain. We interrogated Marjorie about her day. Had she seen anyone suspicious near the house? Anything unusual? Did she know exactly when she was out of the house that day? But it was no use. She had been outside with her wash pail most of the day. Eventually, she became flustered with our questions and began to cry. What was so important about that box? She demanded to know. John advised me to wait for Father Blackpool's return on Sunday night. That would be too late, I told him, since I had to show it to someone on Sunday afternoon. He became visibly suspicious at this, but decided not to press the issue. Instead, he tightly wound his crossbow with his best bolt arrow before going to bed and moved the table against the door. I went to bed, but not to sleep, and was up before sunrise. The three of us ate very little the next day. Marjorie was still upset that someone had invaded her home, and John was worried because he knew I was not telling everything I knew, and he suspected the worst, which was wise. Saturday passed with a few half-hearted chores, some limpid conversation, a cold supper, and worried glances. My large friend offered that the danger was perhaps over, since the thief had got what he had come for and would not be back. But I knew that tomorrow was Trinity Sunday, and that danger had yet to rear its angry head. After another unrestful night, we decided that we had nothing to lose by going to Mass. To commemorate the holy day, the Archbishop gave a lengthy and pedantic sermon on St. Athanasius's Creed, and then made reference to Corpus Christi by lecturing on the 7 properties of the sacramental bread, explaining how they counteracted the 7 deadly sins. The humble grain of wheat fought the sin of pride. The sourness of the dough attacked the seeming sweetness of envying another's blessings. The whiteness of the wafer was an antidote to the blackness of lechery. I forgot the other 4 because, to tell the truth, my mind wandered, and I could do nothing but pray for my mentor's speedy and safe return. But as evening gave way to night, and night began to draw on, we started to worry about the priest. The moon eventually informed us that midnight was past. The anxiety that overtook me is impossible to describe. It was now obvious that something else had gone wrong, and Robert would not appear. Or rather, if and when he would appear was anybody's guess. Thus another fitful night passed. I had vague yet terrifying nightmares that blended the fantasy world of the play with the real world of the troll. In one, the benevolent patriarch Noah was attacked by a troll that had escaped from the bottom of the ark, only to bite off the man's ear. In another, Nehtaehkin was captain of the ark, and as the floodwaters raged through York, drowning us all while the troll laughed his fierce face lit by lightning and dripping with rain. Before morning, I left a note explaining my plans and crawled out of my window and made my way to the cathedral. I intended to fast, pray, and wait for my mentor, though something in my bone marrow told me he would not arrive. But also, and this is more to the point, I wanted to be far from my hosts if an enemy came bent on retribution. The responsibility was my own, and I alone would face the consequences. The cathedral glowed in the soft blush of morning. I entered quietly to the sound of chanting and the prayers of matins. Beams of light slanted down in steep angles from the clerestory windows. I sat on a bench in the south transept that was the recipient of one of these beams and felt that perhaps the light would protect me. As the day waned, this beam of light moved, and I moved with it. Nuns, pilgrims, and tourists wandered down the nave and whispered to one another while I sat quietly in my light and waited. I waited all day long. By vespers, the light faded and the vast womb of the church danced with candlelight and shadows. After the final service, priests and deacons filtered quietly into the narthex. I stayed fixed in the spot where my light had disappeared. How long, I wondered, before someone would ask me to leave and I would have to journey home in the dark? At least an hour passed, and the breathtaking silence both pressed upon me and emanated from me into every nook and cranny of the church. Was it possible that I had remained unnoticed and was now locked inside? As the question began to form, I heard some indistinct whispers from somewhere in the cathedral. Then I heard muffled laughter. I looked in vain for the source of this noise. Then silence. I stood up and walked carefully to the center aisle. The only light now was from the moon, which shone in through the stained glass. A small shadow passed spider-like across the rose window. The whispering resumed, and I realized it was from above me. I caught the phrase, "the impudent boy who betrayed the troll." Then two like shapes huddled together 50 feet above me in a quadrifle, and one pointed at me. After an unbearable interlude of extreme quiet, the first gargoyle began to crawl down the wall. I knew it was pointless to run because I was surrounded. Two more gargoyles slid gingerly down their pillars, and a fourth took flight and circled the south transept from above. "What do you want?" I shouted, but I knew very well what they wanted. The answer came as expected. "We want what you took from the troll. You have broken your oath with the troll." Three of them were on the floor now, creeping toward me. "I don't know where it is," I pleaded. "Someone stole it from me, I swear." "That is not our problem," grunted the largest and fattest of them. "Just give me more time. I'll find it. Please, just one more day." "You are out of days," hissed the meanest looking one. Suddenly the gargoyle with bat wings swooped down and kicked me in the head. When I fell to the floor, three others were immediately upon me with their teeth and claws. I felt one sink his fangs into the back of my right arm, and I rolled and kicked and punched and screamed with every fiber of my being. The fury of my defense actually startled them, and I managed to scramble to my feet. I had no time to check my wounds, but I could feel the blood on my right arm and knew that my left earlobe had been torn off. The one in the air dove toward me again with a mixture of malice and glee on his face. Without thinking, I grabbed an iron candlestick at least half my size and swung it at him, striking him on the head. He flipped over backwards and crashed into the marble pulpit. The large one lunged toward my legs and sank his teeth into my ankle. The now candleless candlestick left exposed a sharp prong, which I brought down with all my force upon his lower back, paralyzing him. I raised my weapon and brought it down again, this time stabbing him in the head and killing him instantly. Yet I had no time to breathe. Two more were closing in on me from my right and left. One slipped accidentally on the blood emanating from the dead gargoyle, but the other pounced on me and dug his claws into my back. I fell over backwards, landed on top of him, and wrestled with him on the floor. His teeth and claws were deadly, but his strength was not great, and if I avoided his biting and scratching, the fight was even. I knocked his head on the floor several times until he was almost insensible. The more helpless he became, the more murderous became my adolescent rage, and I knocked his head harder until I heard it crack like an egg on the floor. The winged gargoyle was in flight again, and the one who had slipped was up and on the pursuit. I ran down the nave toward the main doors, which were barred shut with a large wooden beam. The fiend from the air swooped again, but I avoided him by diving to the floor. I got up screaming and went for the door again, but the other gargoyle leapt to the doors and crawled around them on all fours. I grabbed a large book of hours and hurled it at him, forcing him to leap on a pillar and scamper up it. The hands of this unfortunate wretch were covered with blood, so he was doomed to slip again, this time from over 100 feet in the air. He landed on the floor with bone-shattering force and snapped his neck. The final gargoyle flew vulture-like and planned his next attack. He soared back to the south transept and pulled the lethal candlestick from his friend's brain, flapped his terrible bat wings, and soared back toward the narthex, aiming the pointed end directly at me. I tried in desperation to lift the beam from the door, but had too little time. With amazing speed, the monster thrust toward me, roaring and gnashing his teeth. I barely escaped my death by falling again to the floor, and the iron weapon stuck into the cathedral door inches above my head. The bloodthirsty creature swerved and darted upward, landing deftly on his feet just below the rose window. Trembling, panting, and half blind with the blood on my face, I crawled under a bench toward the statue of the Holy Virgin. When he darted for me again, instinct took over, and I smashed a small votive candle into his face. His grisly beard immediately ignited, and he bounded into a large font of holy water. I wasted no time, but was on him instantly, holding him under water and forcing him down. He flapped his wings, gurgled, and wildly kicked his legs. I was unrelenting. Within minutes, he drowned in a mixture of holy water and vomit. I let his lifeless corpse fall to the floor, detached the bar from the door, and ran screaming. Halfway home, I saw John running toward me as quickly as I ran toward him. His face became distorted with horror and disbelief. "God's wounds, boy! What happened? Half your ear is gone!" I tried to answer him, but fainted instead. When I awoke, I was in a place I did not recognize. The windowless wooden room was dark, but lanterns that hung from low ceiling beams provided a little illumination. John and some members of our Corpus Christi play were gathered around my bed, looking at me with relief and concern. The room was gently swaying. I felt my bandaged face. "Where am I?" "On a small ship docked at the city's port," answered my temporary guardian. "Where's Robert?" "Still missing." "What day is it?" "Wednesday. You gave us all quite a scare." He gave me some broth and a sip of wine. The other kindly mariners smiled, wished me well, and went upstairs to the ship's deck. "Why am I on a boat?" I asked. "Because, lad, the house is no longer safe. They know where you've been staying, and they'll be keeping an eye on it, whoever they are." "What happened?" I was suddenly alarmed. "Never mind what happened. It's your turn to say what happened. What in the devil's hell is going on around here?" With more than a touch of irony, I explained that I had been attacked by 4 gargoyles who had come to life in the cathedral, and that I had killed them all, 2 with my bare hands. Then I began to intellectualize on the nature of miracles and objective reality. Obviously, I told him there were three possibilities. Either I'd suddenly gone mad, and it had all taken place in my imagination, but not in reality, or it had happened in the external world, and some poor priest had spent a nauseating morning mopping up gargoyle blood and disposing of the corpses, or, finally, reality itself was mutable and subjective, and therefore the event could have literally taken place for me and no one else. "This is not a time for your smirks, boy, nor for a lecture in philosophy. I assure you," I replied, "that the story is true and the philosophy necessary. And the smirk is only because I know you will not believe me." "That shows how much you know. Stranger things have happened, for sure. Marge went into your room yesterday, and an old woman was there turning the place upside down. When Marge demanded to know her business, the woman flew right out the window. Flew right out the window." "Lord have mercy," I said. "I think I've met this woman." "Tom, that's not all. Strange things are happening everywhere. The whole town is on edge. 4 babies have been born since Trinity Sunday. None of them have index fingers." I decided that under the circumstances, the priest would want me to confide in my friend, as he has a right to know why his life had degenerated into chaos. The man listened with reverence and suspense while I told him that Father Blackpool had obtained the finger of St. Joseph of Arimathea, and that it had been stolen before he could return it, and that now the magician who had loaned it to him was upset. The only detail I omitted was that the owner of the relic was a troll. At the time, this seemed distracting and irrelevant. We talked about what our next move should be. Marjorie was now staying across town at the home of her cousin, and John and I were hidden discreetly in the bows of a ship with a crossbow by our side. How long should we stay in hiding? We both had an inexplicable feeling that the priest would soon appear. John's advice was to stay in the boat for now and decide the course of action one day at a time. I felt that I should not stay in one place for too long, as the witch would soon find me. Then John suggested a remarkably clever plan. What better place for a boy my age to hide than in the middle of a play, before a large crowd, disguised as an old shrew? No one could recognize me. Tomorrow was Corpus Christi, and the best place to hide would be out in the open. My ear and arm were smarting profusely, but my strength and humor were improving, and a plate of bread and cheese washed down with a pint of ale made me feel ready for anything. We turned in early, as each guild had to report to the city gates at 4:30 in the morning. We were up at 3 and in costume by 3:30. I gazed at myself in the looking glass. I was impressed by the transformation. The wig, the blackened teeth, the dress with the enormous bosom, and the matronly scarf wrapped around my wounded head made everybody laugh. Our walk to the entrance of the city was greeted and hallooed by townsfolk who were already up and waiting to get a good spot from which to view the parade and the dramas. Some had already begun eating nuts and drinking ale. On our way to the gates, John explained to me that the general frightened mood of the city had been exacerbated by recent controversies regarding the plays. Certain members of the ecclesiastical establishment had complained to the mayor that Annas and Caiaphas, Christ's brutal judges, were being represented as contemporary bishops. They resented the satirical comparison. For Christ to enter York and be condemned by the governing power structures, they felt, would be a subversive criticism of the way the city conducted business. They also objected to some of the explicit language, the comedic use of farting on stage, and the general carnival atmosphere of the audience. But the good news was that the dramas were so popular that the city's prosperity now depended on them. When we arrived at the gates, the pageant wagons on which the plays were to be performed were already lined up. No fewer than 24 Christs were present, conversing with each other, telling jokes, and drinking cider. The Guild of Sausage Makers arrived 10 minutes late, and Judas was stuffing his costume with the innards of a pig, preparing himself for the big moment when his intestines would spill out on stage. Our play was the 9th to be performed and would be over by noon, and we begged the shipbuilders who preceded us not to eat all the roasted goose before we could make it to the booth and help them finish it off. By dawn, the city square was packed, and the parade began with the elevated Eucharistic host carried solemnly through the streets, followed by ecclesiastical and civic leaders, and then the city's peacekeepers who marched to enthusiastic applause in their polished ceremonial armor. Finally, the history of the world was ready to unfold, and the city prepared to receive the human incarnation of God. York had become Jerusalem.